This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 30 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome to Engaging Experts. I'm your host, Noah Ballmer, and today I'm excited to welcome Dr. Pavithra Kumar to the show. Now, Dr. Kumar is a principal at Advanced Analytical Consulting Group. She specializes in the application of economic and financial theory to questions arising in complex security and finance litigation. Dr. Kumar is a published author and holds a PhD in finance from MIT. Dr. Kumar, thank you so much for joining me here today on Engaging Experts.
Thank you so much, Noah. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Let's jump into it. So you have a background in economics and finance, but how did you first get involved in expert witnessing?
Well, it's been a long time now since I finished my PhD, but kind of an interesting route. So I'd actually not heard that much about economic consulting during my PhD at MIT. I knew I wanted to go into industry rather than academia. I had interned at Lehman Brothers during the third year of my PhD, doing research work, and I'd actually really enjoyed it. I received an offer to return to Lehman Brothers full-time after the end of my PhD. Unfortunately, my PhD ended in the summer of 2008, so I ended up joining Lehman Brothers right before September 2008. And as I'm sure many of our audience knows, that was a couple of weeks before Lehman went bankrupt. So I hung around for a couple of months at Barclays, which ended up buying up the U.S. operations of Lehman. I did a couple of different jobs. Things were in turmoil there, but I did some technical analysis work on the trading floor, which was interesting, but not quite what I was looking for in terms of a more rigorous, deep research job. So, I went back to some of my contacts at MIT, and one of the professors I knew well there and who I'd worked with was affiliated with an economic consulting group back in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I interviewed with them, really, really liked the people and the nature of the work, which it involves applying analytical skills to real world problems and doing consulting for lawyers on cases where they need expertise in economics and finance. That covers a variety of contexts and industries. So it sounded super interesting and challenging to me. And, I got an offer to join them. And since then, I was at that firm for almost 10 years and I've moved around a little bit since. Worked on both coasts of the country. And now I'm in New York at a boutique, but very well known economic consulting firm. So that's a little bit about my background and my path.
Sure. So tell me about these initial phone calls. You get a call from an attorney or from a representative of that attorney, and they say, "Hey, I've got a case, and it's X, Y, and Z, and we think that you might be the right person." How do you know that you are the right expert for the job, and how do you know that they're an attorney that you care to work with?
Yeah, that's a really good and important question. I have expertise that can be applied in a variety of contexts. So I look to see that it's something that will utilize my core skills, which I would say are in corporate finance, securities analysis, valuation, mergers and acquisitions related transactions work, and really sort of damages analysis across a variety of contexts. So I would say my skills are a little bit more generalist. So I would, look to see that the case exploits those skills and that I can apply that to the specific question being asked. And, I think it first and foremost during these calls, it's very important to establish your expertise in that specific area and show you can really address the specific question they're asking. So you need to establish your credibility right up front to be able to explain potentially complex issues very simply to them. I think that's what they're looking for.
Beyond being an expert in your field, what are some of the intangibles that they're looking for? What makes a great expert as opposed to just a knowledgeable expert?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I just mentioned about being able to break down a really complex issue simply. Other things would be, do you show the capability to ask the right questions of them? Are you thinking a bit more strategically? Are you thinking through potential pitfalls or potential weaknesses of your analysis? I think that's an important intangible factor. How do you present yourself? Do you speak clearly and confidently? Are you someone who's personable, someone who they will enjoy working with, interacting with? Are you, do you come across as a reliable and responsive person? Those seem like basic things, but those are really crucial when you're working on tight deadlines, or on cases which have tight deadlines.
Absolutely. And attorneys, have repeated time and again how important things like demeanor are when they are selecting an expert that's going to
Yes, being calm. Yeah.
exactly stay
Calm under pressure. Yeah.
So one topic I'd really like to get into is there's not a lot of women expert witnesses. You spoke about this recently at actually it was a webinar called "This Talk Isn't Cheap." So tell me about the barriers facing female expert witnesses today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a webinar I gave. It was last year, actually, or I think it was 2 years ago. I'm forgetting on the spot, but it was fairly recently. Yeah, it was hosted by the American Bar Association, the diversity and women's groups there. So I was honored to be invited to speak on that panel. And yes, there are real barriers still facing female and especially minority female expert witnesses today. I have seen positive change and some promising trends. I do have several ex-colleagues from other firms where I know that they have had success in getting on the stand. So that's fantastic. But I think, the real issue here is, being a woman of color in this field marks you out as a minority when the vast majority of attorneys and experts are older and, usually white men. The real barriers go beyond just being a woman of color. So I think, just being a woman and a minority in and of itself doesn't really matter. Most of the people we work with are sophisticated people, they're not prejudiced. It's just a deep subconscious bias, which I think exists. And that's due to presenting yourself or appearing as somebody different. If it looks like you come from a very different culture or background, even speaking with a different accent, having different interests, different type of personality and upbringing, all of these are subtle markers that, again, mark you out as being different from the mainstream, which, again, is
Sure.
really in corporate America is still a white male. And, being a woman of color is correlated to those differences. Correlation is not causation, as economists would say. The real causation here is just being different to the typical white male. So this is something I've reflected on a lot. I think diversity initiatives which companies engage in are all good, but I'm not sure those get at the core issue here. I think women do, especially minority women, do need to be aware of these differences that they present, and you just have to be extra careful at trying to overcome those upfront. I think an issue I've faced in the past is part of my upbringing has been to be very polite and deferential and submissive and, agree with what people, especially superiors, are saying. That doesn't mean that you're not intelligent and are not thinking through the analysis rigorously, but it does present yourself as not being someone who's challenging, as someone who's not thinking strategically, as someone who comes across as very mechanical and detail-oriented, but as someone who's not stepping outside of that and really thinking through the big picture in order to really become an expert in that field or in that particular case. So that that is an issue that presents itself a little more frequently for women, and especially minority women or foreign women. And it can manifest itself in feedback that you get as well. Again, earlier in my career, I did receive feedback that I came across as too passive, too mechanical, not thinking of the big picture. And I think part of that was true. I think, I was so focused on doing a good job and mastering the details that I kind of didn't take myself outside of that and think more strategically. But this, just from my 16 plus years experience in the industry, I definitely think this is an issue that affects women of color who are starting out in their careers, and unfortunately, it can lead to a dent in their confidence and can become somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that you keep getting this messaging that you're too mechanical and passive, and then it's just very difficult to break out of that.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of the difficulty is prior to you becoming already known as a reliable expert in your field when you're just getting started, how do you overcome some of these obstacles? What actionable advice do you have for women and minorities, and in particular minority women who are trying to break into expert witnessing?
I think, as I mentioned before, firstly, being super aware of this unconscious bias. But then secondly, if I were to go back to my younger self and give advice, it would be to, really strive not to come across as nervous or unsure of yourself. I don't think anybody ever has all the answers. And I think, in general, I might be generalizing a little bit, but I think men are a little bit better as still sounding confident even if they don't know all the answers, right? They're coming up with a way to phrase it, and that, I might not know this, but here are some other suggestions, or here are the right questions to ask, etc. So there are ways to, get around not knowing all the answers up front. What's more important is to demonstrate the ability to think strategically, to think big picture, and to be able to present that sense of, you know what you're doing, you're in control, as opposed to, talking very quickly, sounding shy or unsure of yourself. And that, that's a pitfall, I've fallen, it's a sort of a trap I've fallen into earlier in my career. I have seen others falling into that trap as well. So that would be the number one thing to focus on, speaking slowly. I've been told, other women have been told, that you speak a bit fast. Again, that doesn't indicate that you don't know what you're talking about, but it does communicate that maybe you're a little bit nervous and worried about what other people will think. So slowing it down, speaking clearly, loudly, and being able to, come up with an answer on the spot, even if you don't have the full set of information or a fully formed answer. Those are critical skills. And I think, women could focus even more on that in order to overcome some of these unconscious biases that exist in the workplace.
When you talk about developing these skills, are there some sorts of practice? Is there a way that even people who are not minorities, people who just might need to develop these skills further, are there techniques that people can use to get better at, slowing down, considering their response? What are the sorts of things that you recommend that anyone who struggles with these issues can do to improve?
That's a really good question. I will say my previous answers might have come across as, presenting this as an issue that is just something faced by women of color. But I agree with you. I mean, it's very important to stress that this can affect anyone. And I think this is really the root issue. It happens to be, I think, a little more correlated with being a woman or being foreign or being perceived as different, but it can affect anyone. And I think, that's a great question. I would say something that's really helped me, and this was at one of my previous firms, they did invest in quote unquote executive coaching for their staff, not just super senior staff, but people at all levels, associate level, people who are kind of just starting out on in their careers. And so this is, not coaching on the finance or economic skills, everybody has that down, but this is more focusing on the so-called more soft skills, interpersonal skills. So how to present yourself, exactly, things like working on your speech. So, having people practice presenting something and then critiquing that, saying, you sped up here, or there was some issue with your body language, you're maybe covering your face or fidgeting, and that makes you come across as nervous. Really something I've been told in the past that I wasn't aware of is sometimes when I speak, I trail off at the end of sentences. So, I might just trail off like this. I'm giving an example, and that makes it sound like I'm not sure of what I'm saying. And it's completely unintentional. But I think in meetings earlier in my career, I would present a point and they wouldn't land quite as well as I hoped it would, because it sounded like I was just really not sure of it myself. So people didn't pay attention. And part of that is due to the way I said it. I trailed off. And I this is something that both men and women can do, honestly. So having that kind of coaching, I had a couple of sessions at previous firms that really, really helped me, because these are things I was just not aware of before. Making you record yourself in some of these sessions. You gave a presentation, then they played it back to you and pointed out instances where I could have improved my delivery. So again, this is soft skills, but this is super important whether you're just a consultant or whether you're doing expert witness work as well. It's very crucial. And attorneys, this does affect attorneys' perception of you because they want someone who's going to come across as very confident and calm on the stand, and for that they need to know that you're sure of yourself, and that again, this kind of coaching can help you work on that.
Yeah, I've heard from attorneys who use mock cross-examination as a tool that occasionally they'll record the expert witness and force them to look back and watch themselves. Now, people really, really hate listening to recordings of themselves and watching their performances, but I've heard that it can be an extremely effective tool in seeing for yourself things that you might be able to improve upon.
I agree.
That said, what are the sorts of things that the industry, and it's funny to talk about expert witnessing as though it's a single industry, because it's not. It's just, every industry has experts, but what should attorneys and firms be doing to make sure that they're not falling into the subconscious traps of not hiring somebody because of these sorts of perceptions of women and minorities? You've been doing this for 15 years. Is there momentum in the right direction right now?
Yeah, another excellent question. I do think there is momentum in the right direction. I think we have a new generation of lawyers, younger lawyers, more diverse lawyers. Diversity is improving in the legal industry as well. So, you have more female minority lawyers in senior positions who are in charge of hiring experts, and I do see positive momentum there. I think I've personally seen more willingness amongst this newer generation of attorneys to consider up and coming experts above and beyond their usual roster of just a handful of the same experts over and over again. But some attorneys have told me this explicitly, and that they are looking for greater diversity in experts, and this is not something that was said even 5 years ago. So there's definitely positive momentum. The change is still slow. The top experts are still older, mostly white men, but it's going to take a while for this to change. But as I mentioned, I do have colleagues from other firms who have managed to get on the stand, and I've been encouraged by my own my marketing efforts, getting on the Rolodex of more attorneys, getting more expert interviews, more visibility, etc. So there is momentum, but this is going to be a tough one to change. You just need to see more. You need to see change in clients' hiring practices, and that will come with time.
Is there anything that attorneys who do want to move in that direction can actively be doing to make sure that they are considering the entire pool of candidates?
Honestly, just a willingness to step outside of the customary practice of hiring the same handful of
Sure.
experts. I've seen, especially on the plaintiff side, where there's a narrower pool of experts that plaintiff side attorneys use. I think they'd be making special efforts to reach out to different experts. So I would, nothing sophisticated in this suggestion, but I would encourage them to keep doing that. Look on using other tools beyond again, just looking at the same people over and over again. Maybe using LinkedIn to try and keep tabs on experts. There are new expert search services which are available now. Maybe even AI will play a role in helping to find experts in the future. So I think for lawyers, keeping up with some of these technological developments, keeping abreast of some of these new ways of searching for experts beyond just the usual few, I would encourage them to keep doing that. I think change will be necessary at some point, because there are so many new complex areas of litigation arising, and that the usual suspects may not have deep knowledge of those areas, because those are again new, crypto litigation, for example. So there, I think it'll be really necessary to start looking for some of these newer up and coming experts, and so attorneys will be incentivized to broaden their search in this manner as well.
Well, that's a great segue. So shifting gears, you've talked about publicly trends in crypto litigation. This is a pretty new field. So, what is it like being an expert in these new burgeoning upcoming fields? How do you stay on top of the changes that are happening every single day? How should experts maintain their expertise? Because obviously a big part of being an expert isn't just being an expert. It's not necessarily static, it's remaining an expert. So how do you keep on top of your field, and what are some of the considerations that you have to constantly contend with in remaining an expert in the field of finance?
Absolutely. It is highly dynamic, just picking up on what you were saying. Crypto is not an area I was an expert in even just a few years ago. And that, clearly that's because crypto related work has surged in the last, 2, 3 years in particular. So I think everybody who wants to get into this area is having to learn new things constantly. For me, yes, you're right that I recently gave a series of 3 crypto litigation webinars with a colleague and expert at my firm, AACG. And one of the ways I prepared for that is, really just reading everything I can about developments in the crypto world, not just litigation, but also regulatory and enforcement trends. So, I, for one, I love podcasts. Is one of the reasons I'm enjoying being on this particular podcast. But I love listening. I love listening to podcasts. I subscribe to many different types of podcasts. Not even just finance and economics. History is another love of mine. But I do look out for finance/legal podcasts on crypto. So lawyers' perspectives on key trends in the crypto space, key regulatory and enforcement developments. I listen to some, government side podcasts as well. And in addition to that, I subscribe to many newsletters related to crypto. And I'm on top of the news in general. So, in my inbox every day, I get several alerts related to the latest developments, Genius Act, stable coins, crypto being allowed in 401k plans, etc. That there's just been so much going on in the last couple of weeks. The new crypto initiatives led by the SEC. So that's been really helpful. Just being very proactive and subscribing to all these alerts and updates in the crypto space, and that's really helped me keep abreast of the developments. And that helped us develop the key talking points for our webinars. We covered quite a bit of ground. We started out by discussing a general overview of how crypto differs from traditional money, and then getting into some of the key regulatory trends. And then our latest webinar, which was just last week, covered some of the key trends we see arising in the crypto litigation space, and how economic and finance experts can plug in there and help attorneys. And I, in response to something else you asked about, what are the key areas of expertise or skills experts will need to provide in these types of cases. I think what's interesting is I think the same basic tools relating to, assessing economic damages, looking at drops in price of certain securities, these are key tools that you use in assessments of securities fraud. I think those tools would remain basically the same, but you do have to adapt that to the more complex world of crypto technology, and also account for this very dynamic regulatory and legal environment. So it's not a matter of learning completely new skills. It's a matter of applying the basic economics and finance tools that experts already have, but knowing how to apply that to this new highly dynamic environment.
As somebody who gives a good number of webinars, how important is it to continually publish in your field? Is that part of why attorneys find you attractive as a potential expert witness?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say the crypto webinars, for example, did attract a lot of interest from both attorneys and even other experts who thought we could provide complementary expertise in some of these new areas of litigation that we talked about. So it's super important, webinars, also publications. At my current firm, we've published on securities topics, implications of Supreme Court rulings, for example, that impacted 10b5 cases last year. We're planning to launch a series of podcast discussions, which are will be a little bit more informal conversation format compared to our more formal webinar sessions. But featuring conversations with experts. So it's a way to market our general expertise as well as market our network of affiliated experts as well. I think that's very important, knowing how to market that effectively on LinkedIn and other media as well, other forms of media as well. Because attorneys do pay attention to this. And as I mentioned, especially in some of these new and growing areas of litigation, the traditional experts may not have the expertise they need, so they do need to get a little bit more creative in searching for other experts. And again, knowing how to market yourself in these various forms of content on LinkedIn and other channels is really important in reaching attorneys.
You mentioned marketing in LinkedIn and other channels. What marketing has been most effective for you? For instance, have you used referral agencies like Roundtable Group? Do you prefer websites? You talk about LinkedIn. What has been the most effective tool for you?
Yeah, so it's definitely a combination of all of those. I am listed on Roundtable, so I have received a number of expert requests from them, which has been great. But in terms of generating interest from attorneys, I think it all comes down to publicizing relevant content in a concise manner. So I would say lengthy academic journal articles, while that's great for advertising your credentials, that doesn't quite catch the eye of attorneys as much as short and sweet, but highly relevant content that you can blast out regularly. We have a mailing list of attorneys, so we email attorneys with our latest articles, podcasts, webinars, etc. And then also, I help to market that to my wider network on LinkedIn. I also, another channel I use is attending and networking at conferences, especially women's conferences, because frankly there are fewer attendees. There's more of an opportunity to build a close relationship with senior female attorneys there. So that has been super useful. Attending a very targeted conferencing and networking events in my area, in my areas of litigation, trying to sponsor certain events, legal events, and trying to get on speaking panels as well. That's something I'm currently working on, but that has been extremely useful. And joining exclusive expert networks. Roundtable is a referral service. I am also a part of the Securities Expert Roundtable network. I think several of your previous guests are also part of that network, and that's been very useful in meeting both other experts who could use my expertise as complementary to their cases, as well as meeting securities attorneys, crypto attorneys. I met a couple at one of their previous events, which was very useful for me. So yeah, of late, I've really been branching out into, joining these very targeted groups and, again, blasting out relevant content to them as frequently as I can.
I've long thought that expert witnesses would benefit from coming together and discussing their experiences, either within their field or outside of their field. Have you met other expert witnesses, and have you made valuable connections in that way? And is that something that you recommend that other expert witnesses should try to avail themselves of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've obviously worked with and met expert witnesses, throughout the course of my career, because I've supported a lot of high profile experts. But I would say, most recently, I've really, I've seen this, this area of knowledge will really accelerate for me because I joined these exclusive expert networks, such as the Securities Expert Roundtable Group. And I think what they do that's really unique is, they do create a forum for experts to meet and share best practices, even relating to administrative stuff, such as, best practices for billing, crafting engagement letters, how to overcome a certain issue when you speak with attorneys, even the first question you asked me on this podcast, things to cover in your first call with an attorney. I think we discussed that at our annual conference a couple of weeks ago, and they gave me a lot of valuable tips for sure. So I've never really been part of a group that has done that in the past, and so joining this particular group a couple of months ago has been very useful. In addition to the lessons I've learned through working with experts over the last 15, 16 years. But that is very important, and I think in particular, not just sharing stories of things that went well, but it's great when experts also share stories of things that did not go well, lessons they've learned, etc. What to avoid. I don't think we hear enough of that, especially when you work at some of the larger consulting groups with these really high profile, prestigious experts. You don't really get the chance to hear instances of things that went wrong. But I found that in these more exclusive expert networks, people do share those sort of war stories, etc. And that's been very useful for me as I try to expand my expert witness work.
Speaking of working with other expert witnesses, have you found yourself interfacing with other expert witnesses during engagements? Do you have somebody who's like an expert in something that's in a related field but not your field that you end up either working together on or working alongside of? Do you work with other expert witnesses during engagements?
Yes, that situation has arisen. Sometimes on bigger cases, even on the same side, you have several different experts who are working on different facets of a particular case. So, in an M&A case, you might imagine that there could be an industry expert on that specific industry sector, but there will also be more of a valuation/damages expert. There might be another expert on another technical issue on the contract, and maybe a legal expert. So certainly, I have worked on those types of cases. Typically I've supported one of the experts, but have been on calls with the other experts as well. There can be challenges in those situations, in that you do have to be really careful to ensure that none of the experts contradict each other. The experts are obviously, they're talking about different fields, so not necessarily an obvious contradiction in terms of how to conduct a specific analysis, but more indirectly, are they contradicting each other with regards to the big picture? Is a concept that one expert is espousing, does it kind of contradict what somebody else is saying? Also, are they sort of proposing different theories of the case, for example? And you do have to be really careful to avoid that. I find that sometimes, in these cases, especially if you've got a tight deadline, everyone is so focused on working on their own part of the project, and you say, well, at the end, we'll sort of check that there are no conflicts. But then, this always tends to arise at the last minute, and can cause a bit of a scramble to sort of rewrite parts of each expert's report to ensure that you're all aligned. So you do need at least one person in charge of overseeing all the reports. Someone who's maybe not super in the details on each of the buckets, but can oversee everything and check that you're all in sync, that all the experts are in sync. The attorneys technically do this as well, but I think as the consultant, you do need to provide that service to attorneys, because that's an important issue that the other side would pick up on for sure.
Speaking of last minute scrambles, when you're engaged as an expert, do you feel that you're typically given enough time to do the thing that you're being hired to do? Or do you feel that sometimes, boy, I wish you had hired me a couple weeks ago or a month ago.
Right.
Give me a little more time to write this report or to get the answers that you're looking for, do a little research. What's your experience been?
Well, if you have a really good attorney, they should know to hire you with enough time. But, frankly, yes, I mean, many attorneys, especially maybe smaller firms, so maybe more limited resources, do have a tendency to hire experts at the last minute. I have received many requests, of the last year or two, for a 1 week turnaround. They've really contacted you at the last minute. They don't have their act together in terms of giving you all the documents you need. And, thankfully in many of those cases, the case settled, or they ended up not needing expert testimony, which was, frankly, a bit of a relief, because I think it would have been difficult to get what they were asking done in the very short time frame. And, again, with the lack of ability to provide all the relevant documents. But, unfortunately, I do see this. I think in general, attorneys should pay a little bit more attention. If they think they're going to need an expert, they really have to line that expert up with enough time in advance. And again, time and time again, I see that, bad documents are not necessarily always shared right up front. They really need to give you all the information they have as soon as they can, because otherwise this arises at the last minute and can be a scramble to figure out how to get around those issues. So, yeah, I think attorneys could still do a little bit better in this regard.
Moving on to the general, Tell me about what makes a great expert attorney relationship, not only getting off on the right foot, which we talked about a little bit, but maintaining that good give and take, a quality relationship that's efficient and effective, and maybe even a little bit of fun throughout the engagement.
Yeah, I mean, this is a people business, and it's a business that's based on trust. So really being able to establish that trust very early on with the attorney you're working with, that's the most crucial part. And so I think in order to engender trust, I try to be as open and communicative and responsive as possible, and so I would expect that of the attorney too. If a problem arises, they need to tell you as soon as possible. I mentioned bad documents. If there's some negative piece of information, they need to tell you as soon as possible. Don't withhold that. Don't tell the expert at the last minute. Just establish really open communication lines. That's related to having a mutual respect and understanding. Respecting the fact respecting the position you put the expert in, right? Not trying to force the expert to go out of his or her scope. Not trying to squeeze in changes to their opinion at the last minute. Again, I have experienced this, unfortunately, with some attorneys, on the day of filing, trying to make somewhat material changes to the language of the expert report. And, again, you have to be super careful not to just accept that. I've worked for experts, so you kind of have to be the gatekeeper if you're the consultant to the expert, and make sure that attorneys are not reshaping your expert's opinion. So being very vigilant of that, but attorneys should be respectful of experts in that regard, and really understand, what is the scope of this expert's report, and make sure that the expert stays within their lane, because veering out of their lane is one of the ripest areas for attack in cross-examination, if not the biggest area of potential critique for an expert report. They do their best to prepare you for surprise attacks in cross-examination, really taking the time to do a thorough deposition and trial prep with you if the case reaches that stage. And I think all of that helps to build mutual and understanding, respect, and trust. And again, from my side, being as responsive as I can if I'm the expert to their requests, trying to think of ways to improve the report. Really kind of just going above and beyond, and trying to make life for the attorneys as easy as we can as well.
Before we wrap up, that was all great advice. Do you have any other last advice for newer expert witnesses or attorneys working with experts?
For newer expert witnesses, again, I'd say, that I heard this great piece of advice at a previous conference, so I'll steal it here. But for up and coming experts, I think the best way to be seen as an expert and to advance in the field is to really act like an expert from day one. So obviously you still do your day-to-day job, but really act, behave, speak like an expert. Think about what an expert would say. Think through the questions an expert would ask. Think strategically. Think through the weaknesses of your approach, and communicate those up front. Even if you're a junior associate on the team. I think doing all that will change people's perception of you, and they'll really start to think of you as someone who could be an expert down the road. And, again, this was a pitfall earlier in my career where, I thought the focus is getting the work done right. Obviously it is, but I just focused on that as opposed to maybe stepping out a little bit and thinking more about the bigger picture. So this is not just advice for women of color. This is advice for everyone. Step out of the weeds a little bit. Don't just mechanically go through the work. Really think about what the work is for. What are the bigger questions we need to ask here? How does this work fit into the bigger puzzle of the case? And really present yourself as thinking through those issues proactively early on, and that will really help you advance in this line of work.
Absolutely sage advice. Dr. Kumar, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Noah. Appreciate it.
And thank you, as always, to our listeners for joining me for another edition of Engaging Experts. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Engaging Experts. Our show notes are available on our website, roundtablegroup.com.